I thought my wedding day would be the happiest day of my life, but 30 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I accidentally overheard a conversation that destroyed everything I believed about the man I was about to marry, and in less than 5 minutes, the future I had planned for years quietly fell apart without anyone else even noticing, and the strange part was, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't run. I just sat there in my white dress, calm and still, like nothing had happened, like my heart wasn't breaking at all. I was sitting alone in the bridal waiting room, wearing a white dress that felt heavier than it should have, not because of the fabric but because of the meaning people had loaded onto it. The flowers outside smelled sweet and fake at the same time, like everything that day, and I kept telling myself that nerves were normal, that every bride feels this strange mix of fear and excitement before saying yes. Before signing papers that change a life forever. I remember smoothing my hands over my lap, noticing how steady they were, which surprised me, because I had always thought I would be shaking on my wedding day. My phone was on silent beside me, my reflection stared back from the mirror, calm, almost too calm, when voices drifted in from the hallway outside, muffled at first, then clearer, familiar male voices. I recognized his laugh instantly, the man I was about to marry, the man everyone said I was lucky to have. And with him, his closest friend, the one who had been around since the beginning, the one who smiled at me like a brother-in-law already. They must have thought no one was listening. The door was slightly open, and I did not mean to listen, I swear I didn't, but then I heard my name, and once you hear your name, your body decides for you. My breath slowed, my ears sharpened, and I stayed perfectly still. He said my name like it was a topic, not a person, and then he laughed softly and said, I don't love her, you know that, and my heart skipped, not shattered yet, just confused, like it hadn't caught up. His friend answered without surprise, like this was an old conversation. Yeah, but she's good for you, she has money, connections, her job alone opens doors. And then the words that burned into me forever came next, spoken casually, almost bored. Exactly, it's not about love, it's about stability, business, the life I want. Without thinking, I slid my phone closer and hit record, the screen dark, the sound still clear. There was no anger in his voice, no doubt, just certainty, and that was the worst part. My chest tightened but my face didn't change. I felt one tear escape, just one, sliding down my cheek slowly, and I wiped it away immediately, almost annoyed at it. I remember thinking how strange it was that my world was breaking so quietly, no music, no dramatic sound, just two men talking about my life like a deal already done. I could have opened the door, I could have screamed, I could have walked out. But instead I sat there and listened until their footsteps faded, until the hallway was empty again, and in that silence, something inside me hardened, not with rage, but with clarity. I stood up, looked at myself in the mirror once more, and the woman staring back at me was not the same one who had sat down minutes before. She looked composed, alert, awake, like someone who had just learned the truth and decided to survive it. When the door opened and my mother and his mother walked in together, smiling, fussing over my dress, asking if I was okay, if I was nervous, I smiled back and said the first lie of the day with ease, I'm just excited, and they believed me. Everyone always did, because I had always been good at staying calm, even when everything inside me was changing forever. They led me out of the waiting room when it was time, music starting softly in the background, the kind of song people choose because it sounds romantic and safe, and as I walked forward I felt like I was watching myself from a distance, like this was happening to another woman who just happened to look like me. Everyone stood, smiling, phones raised, eyes full of expectations, and then I saw him standing there, my soon-to-be husband, tall, confident, calm, wearing the same expression I had seen 100 times before, warm and practiced, and for the first time since I met him, I saw it clearly as a mask, not a lie exactly, but not the truth either. He looked at me like nothing had happened, like minutes ago he hadn't reduced me to a strategy, a benefit, a step forward in his career, and something strange happened inside me. The pain didn't explode, it settled, it became cold and focused. I walked slowly, carefully, holding my bouquet, every step steady, every breath controlled. And I realized I was no longer walking toward love, I was walking toward information, toward control, toward an ending I had not yet revealed. The ceremony words floated around me, promises, commitment, respect, all spoken like tradition, not intention, and when it was time to say yes, my voice came out clear and calm, no crack, no hesitation, and I saw relief flash across his face, because he believed he had won, because he believed I was still unaware, and while the papers were brought forward, while everyone watched us sign our names, I felt something close to power for the first time that day, because I knew the truth and he didn't know that I knew. As we leaned over the table to sign, my phone buzzed gently in my pocket, a reminder I had set weeks ago for a financial transfer, something practical, something boring, something that now felt like a lifeline. I had always been careful with money. My work as a senior financial consultant had taught me that numbers don't lie. Even when people do, and our shared account was something we had opened together for the wedding expenses, my contributions clear, documented, earned, so while smiles flashed and cameras clicked, I stepped slightly aside under the excuse of fixing my dress, opened my phone, and moved my share back into my personal account, clean, legal, silent, no drama, just protection. My hands did not shake, and I felt oddly proud of that. When I returned to his side, he squeezed my hand, affectionate, convincing, and I looked at him like a stranger you suddenly understand too well. The rest of the ceremony passed quickly, applause, congratulations, kisses on cheeks, people calling us a beautiful couple, and I played my role perfectly, laughing softly, thanking everyone, letting them believe in the story they wanted, because I was no longer acting for him or for them, I was acting for myself, buying time, building space, waiting, and as we walked out together as husband and wife, I already knew this was not the beginning of my marriage, it was the beginning of its end, and I would decide how and when the truth would step into the light. The celebration moved to the reception hall as if nothing in the world could stop it, lights warm and golden, music louder now, glasses clinking, people laughing freely, and I stayed beside him, close enough to look convincing, distant enough to breathe. He played his role perfectly, greeting guests, shaking hands, accepting praise, while I watched him the way you watch a performance after you've learned how the trick works. I noticed small things I had ignored before, how his smile appeared a second too late, how his eyes searched the room constantly, calculating, measuring, and I wondered how I had missed it, or maybe I hadn't missed it, maybe I had chosen not to see it. Friends and family came to hug me, telling me how beautiful I looked, how lucky we were, and I thanked them all, because their kindness was real even if the marriage wasn't. As the night went on, speeches were announced, people tapping glasses, calling names, and I felt a quiet patience settle in me, not anger, not fear, just readiness. I knew what I was waiting for. He didn't. When it was his turn to speak, he stood confidently, microphone in hand, the room falling silent, and he began with a story about fate, about how we met, about love finding him when he least expected it, and the words sounded smooth, practiced, like something rehearsed in front of a mirror. He talked about partnership, about growing together, about how I supported his dreams, and that part was true. I had supported him, just not in the way he was pretending now. As he spoke, he looked directly at me, smiling, trying to pull me into the moment, inviting me to reflect his emotions back to him, but I didn't smile, not even a little. I kept my face neutral, calm, my eyes steady, and I saw confusion flicker across his face. Just for a second, the room shifted, people noticed, whispers began, something subtle but sharp, like the air had changed temperature. He continued speaking, his voice tightening slightly, pushing harder, trying to regain control, but the more he spoke, the clearer it became to me how empty his words were, and when he finally finished and raised his glass, waiting for applause, it came, polite and unsure, and that was my moment, not to rush, not to explode, but to stand slowly, feel the weight of the room turn toward me, and take a breath. My heart was beating fast now, but my mind was clear. I reached into my bag and wrapped my fingers around my phone, feeling its solid edge ground me. I did not speak yet, I simply walked toward the microphone, every step echoing in the quiet. People stared, expecting a sweet response, a loving toast, and I could almost hear the version of myself they thought I was about to be, but that woman was gone, and when I reached the microphone, I placed my phone on the stand, unlocked it calmly, and looked at him one last time, not with anger, not with sadness, but with disappointment so deep it felt heavier than both, and in that moment, I knew there was no turning back, no soft exit, only truth, and I was ready to let everyone hear it. The room was so quiet that I could hear the low hum of the speakers as I adjusted the microphone, my fingers steady even though every eye was on me, and I knew people were smiling already, expecting warmth, gratitude, maybe a joke, because that is what brides are supposed to give in moments like this, but instead I pressed play, just once, no speech before it, no warning, and his voice filled the hall, clear and unmistakable, saying my name like it meant nothing, followed by the words I would never forget, I don't love her, and then his friend's voice, agreeing easily, talking about my money, my job, my connections, like they were items on a list, not parts of my life, not years of work I had built carefully as a senior financial consultant. The sound traveled fast, bouncing off walls, landing on every table, every face, gasps spreading through the room like a wave, hands covering mouths, heads turning sharply toward him, toward his friend standing frozen near the back, his face drained of color. I looked at him for a brief second, but he couldn't meet my eyes. My husband stepped toward me instinctively, reaching out as if to stop the sound, but it was too late. The truth was already everywhere. I watched his expression collapse in real time, confusion turning into fear, fear into panic, and when the recording ended, the silence that followed was louder than the music had ever been. I picked up the microphone then, my voice calm, even, almost quiet, and I said, "I believed you." And I turned to him fully, meeting his eyes. "I trusted you, and you planned a life with me like a business deal." My voice did not shake, and that seemed to hurt him more than if I had screamed, "Shame on you," I said simply, not as an insult, but as a conclusion. I did not wait for him to answer. I did not listen to the whispers rising, the arguments starting, the questions being thrown at him from every direction. I turned away, walked through the room slowly, deliberately, my white dress brushing past shocked guests, past family members who looked like they had just woken from a dream, and when I reached the exit, I did not look back. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, cool and grounding, and only then did my hands start to tremble, not from regret, but from release. I got into my car alone, closed the door, and for a moment I just sat there, breathing, listening to the muffled chaos inside the building I had just left behind. My phone buzzed again and again with calls I ignored, except when I saw my mother and his mother coming out together, concern written clearly on their faces. I stepped out briefly and said the only honest thing I could manage, "I'm not okay right now, please don't follow me, don't worry about me, I will be fine." My voice was firm, and they understood. My mother hugged me once, tight and silent. His mother nodded, eyes full, not defending him, not excusing anything, and that meant more than words. Then I got back into the car, started the engine, and drove away from my own wedding, not as a victim, but as a woman who had taken her truth and chosen herself. I drove without a clear destination at first, letting the city lights blur past me, my white dress still on, feeling wrong now, like a costume from a role I had finally stepped out of. My phone kept vibrating on the passenger seat, his name, his friends, unknown numbers, all flashing and disappearing as I ignored them, my mind replaying the night over and over, not the shame, not the crowd, but the moment I heard his voice in that hallway, calm and certain, and I realized I had not lost anything real that night, only an illusion. After a while I pulled over, stepped out of the car, and took a deep breath. Then I did something small but symbolic. I changed clothes in the back seat, folded the white dress carefully for a second, then thought better of it and dropped it into a trash container nearby, watching it disappear like a chapter closing. I checked into a quiet hotel under my own name, no explanations, no questions. Just a key and a room. Inside I showered for a long time, letting the water run until the noise in my head softened. Then I went down to a nearby bar, not to celebrate, not to forget, just to sit somewhere anonymous. I ordered a simple drink and watched strangers talk about ordinary things, sports, work, life, and it felt grounding to remember the world was still moving, that my life was still mine. When I returned to the hotel room later that night, the calls had not stopped. Dozens of missed calls and messages, apologies mixed with panic, explanations I did not open. The only call I answered was my mother's, her voice careful, loving, worried, and I told her everything, calmly, step by step, so she would not imagine worse things in the silence. She listened without interrupting, then told me she was proud of me, and that was when I finally cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, letting it pass. Later his mother called, and I answered that one too. She did not defend him, not once. She apologized to me for what her son had done, told me she was ashamed, and I thanked her, but I did not tell her where I was. I needed that night to belong only to me. I slept alone in that hotel bed, exhausted but strangely peaceful, knowing the hardest part was over, and that the next steps, legal and emotional, would be clear, because clarity, once found, does not leave easily. The next morning I woke up early, before my alarm, my body still tense but my mind focused, like it had switched into work mode. I ordered coffee to the room, opened my laptop, and started planning, not emotionally, but practically. This was familiar territory for me, numbers, documents, timelines, things I understood. After years of working in senior financial consultant and advising clients on risk and protection, I knew exactly what needed to be done. By mid-morning I was dressed simply and on my way to the courthouse, the building cold and impersonal, which I appreciated, no emotions attached, just process. I filed for annulment, explaining the situation clearly, calmly, providing dates, evidence, and the recording. The clerk listened without judgment, only nodding and guiding me through the paperwork, and when I signed those documents, the signature felt more real than the one I had signed the day before, because this one was honest. By afternoon the legal notice was sent to him. And that was when the calls changed, no longer panic, but pleading, long messages asking to talk, to explain, to fix things, and for the first time, I answered, not because I missed him, but because closure does not always come from silence. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered, strained. He apologized again and again, said he was scared, said he never meant to hurt me, said he was confused. I let him speak until he ran out of words, then I said mine, slowly, clearly. I don't want explanations, I don't want forgiveness, I want the annulment accepted, nothing more. He was quiet for a long moment, then said he would agree, that he knew he had no right to ask for anything else. He told me he was ashamed, that he regretted everything, and I believed he was sorry, but regret does not rebuild trust. We talked briefly about expenses. I told him I expected the money I had personally spent to be returned to my account, every amount documented, no arguments. He agreed immediately, almost relieved to have something concrete to do, something measurable, and when the call ended, I felt lighter, not because he apologized, but because my boundaries had been spoken out loud, clear and final. That evening, as I watched the city from my hotel window, I realized that the woman who had walked into that bridal room was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly who she was and what she would no longer accept. The annulment process moved faster than I expected, maybe because the facts were clear, maybe because the truth has a way of cutting through confusion, and during those weeks I focused on rebuilding my routine, not escaping the pain, but organizing my life around reality again. I returned to work fully, my role as a senior financial consultant demanding focus and precision, which helped more than any distraction could. My colleagues knew something had happened, but they respected my privacy, treating me the same as always, which reminded me that I was still competent, still trusted, still myself outside of that failed marriage. The money he owed me arrived exactly as promised, every transfer correct, and I felt no satisfaction in it, only closure, like a file being properly closed after a long audit. Friends reached out slowly, carefully, some apologizing for not seeing signs, others simply saying they admired my strength, and I accepted their support without drama, because strength is not loud, it is consistent. When the annulment was finalized, I did not celebrate, I simply took a deep breath and moved on. I moved apartments shortly after, not because I needed to run, but because I wanted a space that had never known his voice, his plans, his expectations. I decorated it simply, clean lines, neutral colors, intentional choices, every item there because I chose it, not because it fit a shared future. At night I sometimes thought about the version of myself that almost accepted less than she deserved, and instead of shame, I felt gratitude for the moment of truth, for the clarity that arrived before it was too late, and for my own ability to stay calm when everything was trying to pull me apart. I was not healed yet, but I was stable, and that stability felt like the strongest foundation I had ever built. Months passed quietly, the kind of quiet that feels earned, not empty, and during that time I learned how to enjoy my own company again, weekends filled with simple routines, long walks, books I had put off reading, dinners with close friends who never pushed me to talk before I was ready. My career continued to grow, new clients, bigger responsibilities, and a sense of confidence that came not from ambition, but from self-respect. I invested more time into my health, both physical and mental. Started therapy not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand myself better, and that decision felt empowering, not weak. I stopped measuring time by what I had lost and started measuring it by what I was building, and slowly, without forcing it, joy returned in small, ordinary ways. One evening after work I went to a small restaurant near my apartment, a place I liked for its quiet atmosphere and familiar staff, and as I waited for my table, I felt a presence I recognized before. I saw him, I looked up and there he was, standing a few feet away, older somehow, not in appearance, but in posture, like the weight of his choices had finally settled on him. Our eyes met briefly, and there was no shock, only acknowledgement. He hesitated, then asked politely if he could speak with me for a moment, and I agreed, not because I owed him anything, but because I was no longer afraid of the past. We sat at a small table near the window, and he told me he had started therapy, that he was trying to understand why he had treated people like opportunities instead of humans. His voice was sincere, quieter than before. He apologized again, not defensively this time, but with awareness. I listened without interrupting, noticing how little it affected me, and that realization was powerful. When it was my turn, I told him about my life now, my work, my independence, the peace I had found in stability, not revenge, and he nodded, listening carefully, and I could see regret clearly on his face, real regret, the kind that arrives too late, and for the first time, I understood that his growth, if real, was no longer my responsibility. We sat there for a long moment before either of us spoke, the quiet between us not awkward but heavy with everything that had already been said in the past, and I noticed how different this felt from the night of the wedding. There was no audience now, no pressure, no performance, just two people facing the consequences of one decision. He finally began to talk, slowly, carefully, like every word mattered now. He told me how the moment I played that recording in front of everyone had replayed in his mind for months, how the shame didn't fade with time but followed him into his work, his friendships, his sleep. He said therapy forced him to face parts of himself he had always avoided, the part that valued success over people, image over honesty, and while he spoke I studied his face, not searching for guilt, but for truth, and I saw both. He admitted that losing me wasn't just losing a partner, it was losing the version of himself he pretended to be, and that was the first time his words didn't feel rehearsed. When he stopped talking, the silence returned, and I realized he was waiting, not demanding, just hoping, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for comfort, maybe for a sign that he wasn't a bad person forever, and that was when I understood something important. His healing could not come from me. I told him about my life now, about how my work had grown, how I managed my finances independently and confidently, how peace had become more valuable to me than excitement. I told him that waking up without anxiety was a gift I protected fiercely, and that I had learned trust starts with how you treat yourself, not how others see you. He listened closely, nodding, his regret visible, and for the first time I did not feel anger toward him, only distance, the kind that comes from acceptance. I told him that I believed people could change, but that change does not erase consequences, and that while I hoped therapy helped him become better, my life no longer had space for him in any role, not as a partner, not as a friend, not even as a lesson I needed to repeat. His shoulders dropped slightly, like he had expected that answer but still needed to hear it, and when I said, "This is enough," my voice was gentle but final. I stood up, picked up my bag, and walked away without hesitation, feeling something rare and quiet settle inside me, not victory, not sadness, but certainty, the kind that tells you you've already closed the door and don't need to check if it's locked. After that night, I didn't think about him again the way I used to, not as a memory that pulled at me, but as a closed chapter that no longer needed my attention. Life continued in steady, meaningful ways. My work became more demanding but also more rewarding. I was promoted to a leadership role where I managed large portfolios and advised companies on long-term financial planning, and every decision I made reminded me of how far I had come, not just professionally, but personally. I trusted my instincts more. I said no without guilt, and yes only when I truly meant it. My relationships deepened, friendships built on honesty and mutual respect, and I noticed how calm my days felt, no emotional guessing, no walking on invisible lines, just clarity. Sometimes people would ask about my past, about the wedding that never really became a marriage, and I would tell the story simply, without drama. Because pain does not need exaggeration to be valid, it needs understanding. I learned to enjoy milestones alone, solo trips, quiet celebrations, evenings where I cooked for myself and felt proud of the life I was sustaining, and I realized independence wasn't loneliness, it was freedom with responsibility. There were moments of reflection, of course, times when I wondered who I might have been if I had ignored the truth that day, and instead of fear, those thoughts filled me with relief, because I knew exactly how that story would have ended, and I was grateful I had chosen differently. One afternoon, while organizing old files on my computer, I came across photos from that day, the dress, the smiles, the staged happiness, and I deleted them without hesitation, not because they hurt, but because they no longer represented me. Closing the folder felt symbolic, like clearing space for something new, something honest, and as I shut down my laptop and looked out the window at the city moving forward, I felt aligned with my life in a way I never had before, grounded. capable, and open, not searching for rescue, not waiting for permission, just living fully as myself. Time has a quiet way of proving what matters, and as another season passed, I felt settled in a way I had never experienced before, not excited in a fragile way, but steady, rooted. My mornings began without urgency, coffee by the window, a clear plan for the day, and a sense that my life belonged to me fully. At work I was trusted with bigger decisions, long-term strategies, and teams that relied on my judgment, and I realized how much competence grows when it is built on truth instead of approval. Outside of work, my world was smaller but richer. Dinners with friends who knew my story and never reduced me to it, weekends spent traveling alone or with people who respected my boundaries, and moments of silence that felt peaceful instead of lonely. Sometimes I thought about the version of myself sitting in that bridal room, unaware of what she was about to hear, and I wished I could tell her that she would be okay, that she would be more than okay, that the pain would sharpen her, not break her. I understood now that love without honesty is not love at all, it is a transaction, and I had refused to be currency in someone else's ambition. The world did not punish me for that choice, it rewarded me with clarity. People respected me more, not because of what I endured, but because of how I responded, calmly, firmly, without losing myself. I noticed that when new people entered my life, I no longer tried to impress them. I observed, I listened, and I trusted my instincts. The fear of being alone had disappeared, replaced by the knowledge that peace is not something you find in another person, it is something you protect within yourself. And as I stood one evening on my balcony, city lights stretching endlessly below, I felt gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the moment of truth that arrived in time. Some lessons come wrapped in chaos, but they leave behind order, and my life had become proof of that. Today, when I look back on everything that happened, I no longer see it as the worst day of my life, but as the clearest turning point, because that moment in the bridal room did not just save me from the wrong marriage, it saved me from a life built on lies. I learned that intuition speaks quietly but truth speaks loudly when you finally hear it. I learned that love without respect is empty, and commitment without honesty is just paperwork. My life now is not perfect, but it is real. I wake up knowing my choices are mine, my work reflects my values, my peace is protected, and no one benefits from me without my consent. Sometimes people ask if I would change anything, if I wish I had acted sooner, reacted louder, left immediately, but I don't regret how I handled it. Staying calm gave me control, patience gave me power, and timing gave me justice. I did not need revenge, public anger, or cruelty. The truth did all the work for me. I walked away with my dignity intact, my finances secure, and my future open. I am not bitter, I am not closed off, I am simply aware, and awareness is a gift. If there is one thing I hope anyone listening takes from my story, it is this: never ignore what your mind understands just because your heart is afraid. You are allowed to choose yourself, even if it disappoints others, especially if it disappoints those who benefit from your silence. Walking away is not failure when staying would cost you your self-respect. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think, or helped you feel less alone, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment, or subscribing to the channel. Your support truly matters, and I hope my story reminds you that choosing yourself is always the right ending.